Welcome to BDO's Legal Tech Talk podcast. We're joined by judges and legal professionals to discuss emerging trends, regulatory updates, and the latest headlines. We'll provide tips to help your law firms and legal departments make the most out of legal technology.
Hi everyone, I'm Jared Crafton, BDO's Forensic Technology Practice Leader.
And I'm Daniel Gold, Forensics Principal and Leader of the eDiscovery Managed Services Practice.
Let's get started with this episode's exciting topic.
And welcome back to another episode of BDO's Legal Tech Talk. We are thrilled to be joined in the virtual recording studio, Drew Northern, who is the Vice President of Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer over at Cook Group and Cook Medical. Drew, welcome to the program. We're so happy to have you here.
Daniel, great to be here. Jared, good to see you. Good to talk to you.
Fantastic. You know, Drew, you have, I have to say, a very, very interesting background. We have not had somebody like you on the program yet. Yes, you went to law school, but you served with the U.S. Judge Advocate General Corps, the U.S. Navy. That is JAG for those that are following along. And I'm a little bit envious. We talked about this right before we started recording the program. I actually wanted to be in JAG, but admittedly, I am not smart enough to have gotten to in JAG. So I'm living vicariously through you already, Drew. So you did that, and you were part of the FBI. You were the Chief Division Counsel, Supervisory Special Agent for a little over 20 years. Your background is fascinating. You know, Jared and I did our research about you, and anyway, thrilled to have you on in your own words, because anyone could spout off a bio. Love for you to share with our listeners a little bit more about your background, Drew.
Sure thing, Daniel. I'll start with, don't feel bad that you didn't become a JAG. I wanted to be an F-14 pilot and didn't have the wits to do that either. So, when I was in college, I thought that I would go to law school. I wasn't really sure what I would do with that. And fortunately, the director of admissions at the school I went to, Wabash College, was a former FBI agent and said, "What are you going to do with your law degree?" And I said, I'm not really sure. Maybe politics. I just don't know. And he said, "Well, if you ever thought about the FBI?" And I had no idea that was even a possibility. I thought that someone came up at some point in your career and tapped you on the shoulder and, gave you a secret handshake and you became an FBI agent. I didn't know it was something you could work towards. So I basically decided that I would start working toward that goal. And as I got out of college and went to law school, thought about going straight into the FBI. I realized that's a really difficult thing to do. The average age of an agent is about 30 years old when they're usually second career. And had the opportunity, I saw a Marine Corps JAG team come in and do a moot court and saw that and knew that my dad had served in the Navy. My grandfather had been in the Coast Guard. I knew I wanted to serve, and I thought this is something I'm very interested in doing. And I worked both as a defense lawyer and then later as a prosecutor and then on a staff for an admiral, and got to see what it was like to be in the courtroom from both sides of the bench, and also got to have the opportunity to be on a staff and give advice and counsel to leaders on ethical conduct and standards of conduct and legal and operational issues, and really decided I liked doing that. I did that for 5 years and applied to the FBI and was accepted, and left the Navy on a Saturday and showed up at Quantico the next day on a Sunday and started my new agents training. And then I spent a little over 7 years working as a special agent. I investigated organized crime, violent crime, and I worked, was on a SWAT team and did all what I call the young fun stuff. And then in the second part of my career, I became the Chief Division Counsel in the FBI in the Indianapolis division. And that was also a really rewarding part of my career. I really enjoyed providing legal advice and operational advice. I was also responsible for media. I was the Chief Ethics Compliance Officer or Division Ethics and Compliance Officer, worked as a congressional liaison as well, and worked on training and undercover operations. And so, but then also thought at some point, I'm ready to retire and would like another career. And I really enjoy ethics and compliance, and had the opportunity to come to Cook Group, Cook Medical. And it is an incredible company and a great culture. And I love the challenge. I love what I'm doing. And not often can you say that, the people in a profession are genuinely good people, almost always, but that's the case when you look at ethics and compliance professionals and the kinds of people you get to be around. It's really just an honor, and I enjoy what I do. I can't tell you how much I love it.
Well, Drew, thank you for sharing your background. I mean, truly fascinating career journey from you and somewhat atypical from, some of the other compliance officers that we've had on the podcast and some of the ones that we encounter. Can you share how your experiences in the Navy and the FBI helped shape your understanding of compliance and technology?
Sure. So first I'll start with saying that both the Navy and the FBI are really highly regulated fields. That lots and lots of rules, lots of bureaucracy, lots of policies, and a strong commitment to core values and integrity. Both organizations are 100 or more years old, and both have expectations of really high standards of conduct. What I really liked was working in an area where I could communicate and try to foster that culture of commitment to values, commitment to policies, and doing what's right, and getting to accomplish a mission, but to do it in a way that is reflective of the values you have. And that's very consistent with what E&C is all about. It's helping organizations accomplish their mission, but in a way that's consistent with their values. I think, working with standards of conduct, promoting values, thinking about policy and training and investigating misconduct and mitigating risk, those are all things that are part of being a naval officer, a JAG officer, but also part of being in the FBI as a chief division counsel and ethics compliance officer. Those are the same things I do today, and I really, really enjoy that. I think when you talk about technology, the Navy, this may date me a little bit. I was in the Navy after ships stopped having sails, but I was in the Navy before there was an internet. And the DoD had their own LAN and WAN, local access and wide access networks. And I happened to work at a base where there was lots of tech, lots of use of tech. We had a computer PhD scientist and a team of what I called the IT SEALs, who were just creating incredible uses of technology at the time. And seeing that and seeing the importance of technology and staying on the cutting edge was something that was imprinted on me at that early time. And then the Bureau as well, as I said earlier, the transformation the Bureau underwent post 9/11 was really a transformation that modernized in many, many ways a law enforcement agency into incorporating business practices, but also a lot of technology.
Drew, I was thinking that your background would be very interesting, but you've actually surpassed what I was initially thinking here. At some point in your career in the FBI, there was this transition that it sounds like that the ethics and compliance aspect became interesting to you. And it always fascinates me because, for me personally, I love giving CLEs to talk about attorney ethics. I think that attorney ethics is a fascinating topic. I think it's something that we should all be very well aware of. And so I talk about it a lot. As a compliance and ethics officer, what was it exactly that triggered you to say, you know what, this is actually the path I want to pursue, and this is my passion, this is my calling? What was that?
Sure. I would say that it was sort of a combination of two things. I think from an opportunity standpoint, I looked at what the FBI was doing in the area of creating Division Compliance Council and really embracing the development of ethics and compliance as a profession and being really forward thinking, especially for a government agency. We had a lot of training about ethics and compliance, and we were early adopters, I would say, in the FBI. I think that was one thing. And then individually, I find the work really rewarding. It's, for one, if you're curious, if you're intellectually curious, if you like to promote values, to train, to investigate, to get to the root cause of problems, those are the kinds of things that you do. And I really enjoy that. And I knew that as I transitioned out of the FBI, I wasn't necessarily looking to be in security or even specifically in investigations or using that sort of law enforcement background. But the work that I was doing in ethics and compliance was something that I really enjoyed.
What was that transition like when you were coming out of the FBI and, you're coming into a company and, you're focusing on compliance and, some of that is kind of law enforcement, within a company, but I would imagine collaboration, is a little bit increased and you kind of have to get used to not having subpoena power anymore. Could you talk a little bit about that transition and what some of that, some of your initial thoughts there were?
Your note about subpoenas is really interesting because when you think about an investigation, and maybe I really didn't think about this until I started doing investigations in the private sector, and you realize that you're not showing up with an FBI badge to talk to somebody. You're not showing up with subpoena power or a search warrant. You are trying to ask them, would you be so kind as to talk to me? And would you be so kind as to let me look at your cell phone? Those kinds of things. So there are analogs from those investigations, but it's a different thing. I'd say, from when you make the transition from law enforcement or national security into the private sector, there were a couple things I would say from my perspective. One of the things that I always assumed was that the private sector had everything all figured out and that they were, from a business perspective, everything was running smoothly. I had worked in the government, and the government was obviously lagging behind the private sector. I had to be honest with you, there are a lot of ways, not just at my company, but other companies where in the FBI, we were more advanced with our policy management systems, with our ethics and compliance programs, with our strategic planning, with our risk mitigation strategies, with having a chief knowledge officer, a chief information officer, lots of things that private sector, and again, not just my company, but other companies had not yet mastered or had up and running. And so I was a little surprised by that. We're here to protect them, we're here to help them, but you don't really realize, you're not exposed to how many really talented, good people of high integrity and incredible talent that are out there working to make the world a better place. I was very happy to see that and experience that. And it really gave me a completely new perspective on things. I think a much more realistic perspective on how many really good people there are, especially in the ethics compliance field and in the private sector in general, that there are people who are so smart and so talented. I think those are probably the biggest things. I think it's been an interesting transition, but it's been good.
People's perception of you is an interesting point that I guess, I hadn't really considered, right? Because people see you as that ex-FBI guy, ex-Navy guy. And, as you're adapting to the corporate world, they're kind of adapting to have, a former law enforcement person there as well. So it's interesting from both sides.
Right. Well, and also it's a good reminder that, we should all not just assume or make assumptions based on someone's background. If someone comes to you, to your E&C team, or you're interviewing someone in an investigation in a corporate setting, and you start making judgments, okay, well, they have a law degree or they don't, or they're coming from a finance perspective, or they're a marketing person, or they're a creative, or whatever it is, they're in sales. You make certain assumptions without really knowing whether or not those are based on actual facts. So it just is a good reminder to take some of our preconceived notions, some of our conscious and unconscious biases, and keep those in mind as we deal with people.
I think that if you were coming to me and I knew that you were a former SWAT team member and you were telling me I had to comply with policies, I think that I would not second guess you. So let's transition a little bit to technology, though. In the world of compliance and also in ethics, technology has to play a major role, right? You draft policy to have people comply with certain regulations, right? You need to have technology to be a part of the processes. There are certain mechanisms in place that you have to have in order for policies to be complied with, correct? And so from your perspective, how important is technology? Where does it come into play? And how do you leverage technology in a smooth way so that it is part of everyone's workflows and part of everyone's protocols and not something that gets in people's ways?
Sure. So I think if we start at the very basics, we would say that technology is really, it's a tool. It's something that, some sort of advanced tool that's going to help you do something. But you have to decide first and foremost, what is the something that I'm trying to do? And I think I was really fortunate in the Navy to have received a lot of continuous improvement training. The Total Quality Leadership Program, I think I had over 240 hours of quality training. And that sort of continuous improvement mindset is something that, from the very beginning, you have to ask yourself, okay, let's map this process. Let's see where we're trying to get. How do we get from A to B? And let's look at the process. Are there ways that we can make the process more efficient? That's continuous improvement. How can we reduce waste? But the other thing we can do is say, how can we be more efficient in these steps in the process? And technology is what helps us get there. And I go back and I think of, technology or data-driven solutions. And I think about, I'm interested in statistics mostly because I like sports. I like baseball, I like basketball, I like football. And those statistics I've always found interesting. I think I look at things like data. I have a watch on today, and I won't say I'm obsessed with, but I love to know what's my body battery, how do I sleep, like all those points of data are good because they help inform me. But I think it's really important, first and foremost, to ask, what is it we're trying to accomplish? What ways can technology help us accomplish that? How can we be more efficient? And technology isn't always the answer, but more often than not, it can help us if we pick the right technology and we have the right data as an input, then it can help us get to the right answers.
Is there a particular use case or maybe an investigation you worked on where you're particularly proud of the use of some technology?
So I would say that when I think about technology in general, if you think about the FBI, for instance, the FBI has the FBI laboratory, and its long and storied tradition is that it was not only trying to be more professional in law enforcement, but also rely on research and rely on technology. And so it has a long history of that. In the FBI laboratory, for instance, in the area of forensics, there is so much technology and so much work, not just even outside of things we would normally think of things like digital evidence review, but all kinds of forensic advances that come out of science and technology. But I would say probably the biggest thing I would say during my career is that I was able to watch, at the beginning of my career, a very large case, a very large white collar case that involved hundreds and thousands of banker boxes and lots of brand new agents carrying those banker boxes and walking into a room and setting them down on a table and going page by page by page and looking for evidence. And you think about where we are now and the fact that we have digital evidence review where you can look at the metadata and you can, from the most simple using Adobe find and replace tech tool to very, very sophisticated AI to do digital evidence review, you see the evolution and the ability to consume and sift through enormous amounts, really impossible amounts of evidence. And I see that even in the work that, investigations we do internally, we're able to look at emails in a way and, electronic communications in a way that you would never be able to do one at a time to give us information. So I also look at other technology, things like, ground penetrating radar and satellites and all kinds of other things that were used in cases that I worked on that, facial recognition and biometrics, and it goes on and on and on. And you just think, it's a lot different than what it used to be in those ways. But also, an investigation is an investigation. It's about getting to the truth of the matter. And a lot of times that's going to involve not just an evidence review, but also interviews and building rapport with individuals involved in the investigation.
I like what you said before about, technology being used when you understand what is the problem that we're trying to solve for, basically, right? I mean, that's essentially where you're going.
The first thing I would say is that it's our responsibility to understand, no matter what the technology is. I think the example we would be talking about today is AI. It's our responsibility to understand what is AI, like not just what the headlines say, but talk to people who are experts and really try to create an understanding and develop an understanding of what AI is capable of doing, what some of the risks of using it are. I think that's the place we have to start. We have to know our business. We have to know what we're trying to do, what kind of business we work in, what risk we have, what data is important to us, how we collect that data, and then how we normally would let that inform us. But then we have to understand what risks there are. So we take what the technology is, what data we have, and what business we operate in, and then we ask ourselves, okay, well, what risks are being created by this? So that's a broad answer to what a chief ethics and compliance officer needs to do. How will AI affect our company? And what do we need to do to mitigate risk? But then there's also within my team, how are we going to use E&C? Every function has a use case. And so the question becomes, how will we use it to do our work better? How will we leverage that technology to be more efficient, to be more effective in our promotion of the values, promotion of the corporate culture, achievement of the mission, and mitigating risk? So it's having that broad-based understanding of the technology, having an understanding of the business and the business risks that are involved, but then also thinking about how can I at a team level and an E&C level, how can we do our work better and accomplish our mission? And then even I would say all the way down to the personal productivity part of it. Like, I've tried to, and I'm working on going from taking handwritten notes to moving to using digital formats so that I can more easily have that AI technology, use that and leverage that to be more productive. So I think it's thinking of it, maybe in a funnel. How does it affect society? How does it affect our business and industry? How does it affect my team? And then how does it affect me, is how I've tried to look at it.
Your compliance department oversees a very diverse group of businesses, right? Everything from medical devices to a casino, I believe, right? So, I mean, how are you using data to monitor, such a diverse group of businesses? And I assume somewhat, bring it into some sort of common platform of compliance.
Right. I would start with saying is no matter what company there is, every company has data and every company has a mission. And the data is going to feed into making decisions about how we accomplish the mission. And so the data might change, but the use cases that are out there, regardless of what the industry is, or regardless of what business line it is, we're still going to have the same issues regarding, do we have the right data in the right format? How can we leverage AI? What kind of use cases are there? And so regardless of whether we're talking about Cook Aviation or we're talking about Cook Medical and medical device manufacturing and distribution, the real question is, what are we trying to accomplish? What data helps us make decisions that inform our strategy and helps us make timely decisions with better data, better analysis? And then what risks are involved and how do we mitigate those risks? There are different use cases based on different business lines or different industries. But in the end, it really boils down to knowing what data is important, knowing how to collect that data, knowing how to apply the AI technology, and think about the risks. And also, I would add unintended consequences.
What are some of the ethical concerns, as you're collecting data across the globe and you're moving to more advanced technologies? And you mentioned the E&C team itself is evaluating technologies to get themselves better, which I love, right? I think everybody should be exploring those use cases now. But, are you running into any ethical concerns or considerations as you're collecting this data and testing some of these new tools?
Yeah, we are, and everyone who's using AI is, whether they know it or not. And so when you think about the ethical considerations, the things that come to my mind would be, first and foremost, data privacy and just how are we gathering the data to begin with? Was this gathered for this specific purpose? Was there consent? Is this a proper use of the data? What limitations did the owner of that data put on the use of the data? How are we retaining it? How are we protecting it from a security standpoint? How will we share it? So data privacy, data security, those are all fundamental because we're talking about data. I think also we have to think about very specifically bias, the idea that, again, I don't have an IT background, but what I do know is that if you boil it down to AI, generative AI and large language models and machine learning in general, if you boil it down into the simplest terms, it's a black box that gets fed food of some kind, and then there's an output of some kind. And if you want to really dumb it down to my level, I would say junk in, junk out. And so what you have to be, I think, prepared to do is think about, if we feed it the wrong things, this model is going to spit out the wrong answers. And those wrong answers could be the consequence of bias in the system or bias in the algorithms. And you want to make sure that you're always having that human eye, human touch, and a real focus on trying to avoid unintentional bias or intentional bias. So I think that's a big one. I mentioned unintended consequences. A lot of times, I think what we haven't talked a lot about is that even if you're using the right data and that you've removed any bias and you feel confident that what you're getting is good, you might make a decision that has unintended consequences. And so thinking through what you're doing, what decision is being made based on that AI, you can end up with unintended consequences. I think thinking that through, I think also there's a real danger if the data is not good, that you overemphasize the AI's ability to give you the answer that you need, and you put too much confidence in that decision. And we could be out, even if it's not something that is violative of data privacy or that has bias in it, it could just be giving us bad information. And so it's only as good as what goes in. And so making sure that we're thinking through and putting that human touch on it is really important as well. I think those are some of the ethical considerations that I would think of.
How do you work with your legal counsel? Because there's a lot of balance, talking about mitigating risk, talking about leveraging AI in an appropriate fashion, not having over reliance on this, understanding the ethical consequences. But I'd also say the one thing I heard but didn't really hear, but it's really the benefits of technology as well, right? To be able to help us generate additional efficiencies. When you're working with legal counsel, how do you counsel the counsel to say this is technology that is good, that there are benefits, because lawyers are so risk adverse in general, right? They are the laggards, they are not the early adopters, but there's got to be a balance, right? Because you said it yourself, you harken back to the days of the banker boxes, right? But now we can, review, millions of documents leveraging advanced analytics. So how do you find that balance when you're talking with counsel and advise them, here's what we can do, here's what we can't do?
One thing I would say is that when we're considering working with AI and how we go about the governance and use of AI in our companies, I think it has to be cross-disciplinary. It has to be cross-functional. We can't in a silo say, okay, we've got the data scientists, we've got the folks from AI, we're going to make a decision, this is what we're going with. We can't let the people on the business side say, this is what we need out of it, this is what you need to make it do. We can't have just E&C saying, hey, these are some of the ethical considerations or compliance considerations. And we can't just have legal saying, no, don't do anything. I think it goes back to one of our E&C function mottos, which is it's the idea that we are the Department of No as in knowledge, not the Department of No as in you can't do it, because that's the easiest way to mitigate risk. So I think, it's important that we get everybody at the table and listen to everyone's perspective and opinion and experience, and then find a way forward based upon the consideration of all of those different perspectives. Fortunately, I think in any company, the best GC, the best, lawyers are ones that understand the risk, understand how to mitigate that risk, but also understand how to get things done. And that's what we're all as a team trying to bridge that gap between what needs to be done and what would be done in a way that could cause some harm.
I'm very interested in your thoughts of regulation and enforcement in this area of new technology and AI as it rolls out. I mean, I think we can all agree that the regulations haven't caught up yet. What's your thought on just the current state of, regulation in this area, and where do you think it's headed?
Right. Well, I would start with it's not unlike other areas of legislation or other efforts to enforce, whether it's anti-bribery, anti-corruption, data privacy, trade compliance, sustainability. You have every or most governments in the world trying to figure out how to motivate people to do things the way that government wants them to do it. You also have the issues with, is it a country requirement or is it an EU requirement? Is it a US federal requirement, or is it each state putting their own spin on it? And so there's lots of complexity in just monitoring the regulatory landscape and trying to figure out how you do things in a way that's compliant with all of the different regimes. I think when we look at enforcement in general, what I would say is that there's lots of changes over this last decade. I would say first and foremost, we mentioned earlier, digital review. The fact that you can use digital review and that things are fewer and fewer paper documents and things are digital, it just means that a lot more investigation can be done a lot faster and a lot more cost effectively and a lot more efficiently, which means those investigations get a lot easier. I would also add that it's not just the digital review, but it's also things like whistleblowing. There's a lot more incentives for whistleblowers, and an understanding that the whistleblower will have inside knowledge and inside understanding that is critical in making a government's case. There's also a lot of international cooperation. Governments have figured out that if they want to work together, especially in transnational crime, as they work together, cases can be made in a way that they couldn't be made 15 years ago. I'd also add that there's a lot more scrutiny in the area of civil society. So watchdog groups and individuals have access to information that they would have never have had access to before. And that kind of transparency, that kind of visibility means that there's more and more people who are transparency reporting and sort of insisting and advocating for certain positions. There's also, I think, a realization by governments that enforcement and the associated fines and penalties can actually fund more enforcement. As that does that, then you're not taking the tax dollars to pay for it or government dollars to pay for it. You're taking the money from the wrongdoer and funding enforcement. And then the last thing I'd say is that there's this creation of expectations about what an ethics compliance program should look like and what governments will consider reasonable efforts in mitigating your risk. It's just something that the US government and other governments globally are publishing. This is what we expect you to do. And if you don't do it, you will have fallen short of what is expected of you. So those are some things I think that have evolved over the last decade or so.
If you're ready to take on the biggest challenges in e-discovery, then access BDO's latest ebook, How to Tackle and Manage 5 Common E-Discovery Challenges. BDO developed this ebook to provide actionable insights and strategies tailored for legal professionals. Dive into essential topics such as data privacy, cost management, and advanced technologies to streamline your e-discovery process. Download the ebook on BDO's Legal Tech Talk podcast page. We've talked a lot about AI, but to really hone in on when we're talking about AI, I want to talk about what would an episode be here on BDO Legal Tech Talk if we didn't talk about generative AI, right? So I want to really narrow the scope when we're talking about AI, because AI can really be encompassing of anything from, concept searching or clustering or email threading. And those are all advanced analytics that fall under the umbrella of artificial intelligence, always have. Even, keyword searching algorithm, I would say falls under the AI umbrella. But when we talk about generative AI, where are the compliance ethics risks that you see? Because it's not going away. It's injected itself into every single institution globally. And I have to imagine between the various different generative AI tools that are out there and people having access to it within corporations, I can't even imagine what it must be like to be in your shoes to try to hone in on that risk.
Right. Like everything in ethics compliance, what you're trying to do is figure out what are the use cases? What are people trying to do? What are they trying to accomplish? But then also, what risk does that create and how do we mitigate it? How do we get the job done, but do it in a way that doesn't put us at risk or put, those who are associated with us at risk? And so I think when you talk about generative AI, I think you need to start with the idea that this isn't a thing that you can opt in or opt out of. AI is here. It's no different than when electricity came in or the steam engine or the Industrial Revolution. And so the idea is to understand it and try to put structure around how we use it. I think, one of the biggest thing that's interesting to me, and even outside of governance and mitigation, is that you can't do everything that you could possibly do. No company could use every bit of AI that they could possibly use, because there's just not enough time in the day and not enough money to do it. So you have to think about, okay, let's look at all of these potential use cases. Let's think creatively. Let's think outside of the box. But in the end, we have to prioritize our uses. What will get us closer to the mission faster? There are so many different uses that even machine learning that we're using, even if we're not using it in-house, we have third parties who are using AI, and we need to be aware of what those third parties are doing with AI as we, work with them and partner with them and contract with them. We need to know what the limitations are, what their parameters are, what their risk mitigation is, both from a security and privacy standpoint, but also what if it's spitting out bad information. So I think that's important. I think understanding what we have that we're already using and may not recognize as AI, but then also prioritizing, looking at the opportunities, and then putting some structure, some governance structure, again, not to take away from creativity or the use, but also to just think about how do we do this in the right way.
So you mentioned, I think, that you are playing with generative AI in your compliance department, and I'm sure every business line, at Cook Group and Cook Medical are, trying to find use cases for it and just creating more data out there. Are there any, use cases where you think compliance is really, really going to benefit from generative AI here in the short term?
Yeah, I think the general answer for E&C professionals is that we're definitely going to benefit from those routine, mundane tasks, those things that require us to do data entry and very basic data analysis. Everything from investigations to transactional reviews and auditing. I think, contract management and reviews and performance on those contracts, due diligence, media monitoring, adverse media monitoring, a lot of content creation and training creation, specifically, multi-channel, multimodal, kind of looking at specific audiences and being able to change that training to fit someone who's in sales versus someone who's in production versus someone who is in a support function. Using AI to do that kind of work, I think, is really important. I think the real obvious one is, digital review and just all kinds of data analysis. But just always remind, my team and myself that, there's also a personal productivity and team productivity piece to all of this, that AI is going to, just like email changed the way we did work, AI is going to change, the way we do our work. And, it's a skill that we have to develop. We have to be curious. We have to work on learning about, and it is work. It is work to learn how AI can make us more productive. And there's a little bit of an adoption phase where we become a little less efficient as we learn a new process. So if I'm trying to use AI in my email system, I'm going to be a little bit slower. I may have to revert back a little bit to my old email and get my work done, and then say, okay, now I'm going to try it today and see how this works.
I absolutely love that training use case. I mean, the idea that you can take training content from the ethics and compliance department and truly individualize that. I think you can get down to an individual level, to really connect with people, is absolutely fascinating to me.
Those are things that are down the road, but I also think that there's a lot of things that we can do with AI. When we talk about gamification and looking at efficacy of training, I think there's a lot of ways there's going to be room for improvement down the road.
Drew, one of the things you said early on in the beginning of our program, I think is great. And you just said it just now at the tail end of what you said. There is this continuous improvement mindset that I think everyone should have. And this idea of taking these leadership courses that you talked about early on in your career, having this curiosity mindset. I think if anybody takes anything away from the program today, it's not just learning about compliance, learning about ethics, learning about the risks and benefits, but it's really about being able to have this curiosity mindset, being able to have this mindset of continuous improvement. And I think that our listeners were very lucky to have the opportunity to hear you, Drew, and listen to all of the different nuggets that you had to offer. And with that, thank you very much for joining us on BDO Legal Tech Talk. It was a pleasure having you on the program here, Drew.
Yeah, my honor. I really appreciate it, Daniel. Jared, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us on BDO's Legal Tech Talk podcast.
If you're enjoying these podcasts, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe for more episodes.
Head over to BDO.com for a list of all of our episodes, transcripts, resources, and how to get in touch with us to continue the conversation.
Until next time, this has been another episode of BDO's Legal Tech Talk.